lifespan. So when they discovered this, they opened the first mystery school. It was known as the McCall Mystery School, the first mystery school in our cycle, and it was for the purpose of teaching immortality to others. In about 1,000 years, they got about 1,000 graduates. In other words, about 1,000 immortal masters. That this was the first crop of ascended masters. When Lemuria sank, these 1,000 or so ascended masters went to a new continent that rose in the Atlantic, known as Atlantis. Mm-hmm. They went to a small island, the northernmost of the islands of the continent of Atlantis, and began a process that culminated in the summoning, if you will, of the transplanted Lemurians. When Lemuria sank, the people went from as far south as Lake Titicaca to about as far north as Mount Shasta. And when the ascended masters had finished their little business on this small island, what they did was they created what you might call whirling vortices of energy that summoned the transplanted Lemurians to these different vacant areas in Atlantis. The thing is that there were 10 vacant vortices of energy swirling around. They only had the understanding at the time of 8 of these vortices, meaning that 8 of these vortices were filled with Lemurians, and that left 2 vacancies.
And what happened to them?
Well, these vacancies were filled by ETs. The first group is known as the Hebrews. The second group came from Mars.
Wait a minute. You're saying the Hebrews are from space?
Yeah.
How do you know that?
Well, that's what the Ascended Masters say.
How do they know that?
They've been around the block a few times. Most of this came from a guy by the name of Thoth, who was known as Thoth in Egypt, but for 16,000 years prior to that was the king of Atlantis. Mm-hmm. He was known as Chikutet-Arlech Momolites. 52,000 years ago, he figured out the nature of the game. He went through a process called resurrection and discovered that you don't have to die in the way that we just unwittingly bought into for the past few thousand years.
You got to talk into the phone, Bob. We can't hear you.
Okay. So 52,000 years ago, Thoth figured out the game and has never again had a break in memory. So the bulk of this information comes through the eyes of this one individual, Thoth.
Is he still around?
He's still around. Yes, he is.
Where is he?
He's, for the most part, the Ascended Masters are hanging out on the 10th, 11th, and 12th overtone of the 6th dimension. But for most of his 52,000 years, Thoth stayed back and participated more directly in our evolution. Like I say, for 16,000 years, he was the king of Atlantis. Mm-hmm. And we know him as Thoth, who came out and in Egypt was known as the scribe, the person who wrote everything down. In fact, the very person who introduced writing. So, and when Egypt went down, he was known as Hermes in Greece. Mm-hmm. So he's been around, and he's seen a lot. And most of this information comes through the eyes of Thoth.
Now tell me about the Hebrews and where they came from.
Okay. Well, Thoth said that it's not known where they came from, but that they were like a student who had failed the grade. Say they failed the 5th grade, and they had to come back and repeat it over again. And he said 2 things. Number one, they came here with permission. That's significant compared to the next group that we'll talk about, the Martians. The Martians did not come with permission. We'll have to lay that down in a few minutes. But in addition to coming with permission and coming back to, so to speak, repeat the grade, Thoth said that they, even though they, you might say, failed the grade, they had a lot of advanced knowledge, a lot of understanding that we didn't have. They were different from us, but they were not a problem, and in fact, they were a help in many ways.
The Hebrews?
The Hebrews, yeah.
How, when you say us, and they were different from us, who are us?
Well, us.
Who are them?
The us would be the transplanted Lemurians on Atlantis.
Is that who we are?
That's who we are, yeah.
So in other words, if you're not a Hebrew, you're a transplanted Lemurian?
Or you could be a Martian.
And how do they fit into the picture?
Well, the Martians came in a very interesting way. Now, when this all happened, this was about 65,000 years ago in our past. In order to understand where the Martians came from, we have to go back a lot further than 65,000 years. In fact, a little less than 1 million years ago, Mars was in the final stages of destroying itself. What's so sad is that at that time, and prior to that, Mars was an alive and beautiful planet. It had lakes, it had rivers, it had oceans. It was beautiful, very much like planet Earth. But what he said is that they were suffering from a phenomenon known as the Lucifer Rebellion. And
What's
what
that?
they did, well, what the Lucifer Rebellion is originally the what you might call universal pattern of creation, known as the Merkaba, was intended, you might say, only to be created as a living extension of our energy fields around our body, where your heart and your mind have to come to unison in order to, you might say, turn these fields on. But what Lucifer discovered is that you can separate yourself from the reality and create it through technology. Now, this is what commonly we refer to as a UFO. It's taking the road of technology, where you can take the universal pattern of creation using only the left brain, only the male logical understanding, and you can create it that way too. The problem is that when you go down this road to the nth degree, as evidently the Martians did, you're separating your right brain, intuitive, caring, emotional aspect from the rest of life. And so ultimately what you become is a total left brain culture, extremely intelligent, but with no emotions, with no feelings.
Is that where we are now?
Well, we do. We haven't taken we're not to the nth degree like the Martians were. I mean, we still do have emotions. We still do have a right brain intuitive side. We have not completely severed ourselves. But having said that, we are at the effect of the Lucifer Rebellion. I mean, for sure we are.
When you say Lucifer, are you referring to Lucifer as in the devil?
Yeah. What I mean is this, is that there's 4 times that this has happened, that Lucifer is just the fourth and the last time. The Lucifer Rebellion from Lucifer itself happened about 200,000 years ago, where at that time, at one point, he was the greatest angel that God had created. But he decided to, you might say, go one better than God. And given that he knew the universal pattern of creation, the Merkaba, and knew that it could be created externally, he went down that path. And again, the problem being that ultimately you sever your emotional body. But to go back to Mars about 1 million years ago, this was the 3rd time, the time before Lucifer, and they were in what you might call the final stages of destroying themselves. I mean, they were always at war with each other. Well, what he said was that there was a small group of them, about 1,000, maybe 2,000 of them, what you might call the global elite, the ones who ran the show on Mars, went to an area of Mars that we now know as Cydonia, the area that Richard Hoagland chiefly has researched, you know, the face on Mars, the D&M pyramid, and all the rest of the complex there. And what he said is that they went and they built a external Merkaba field in the buildings, in the complexes there, and used that, given that it's a time-space vehicle, to, number one, get themselves off of Mars, and number two, find for themselves a suitable place where they could re-inhabit. Well, what they did is they looked through time, they looked through space, they looked through the dimensional realities, and they saw this point in time about 900,000 years in their future, about 65,000 years in our past, this vacant vortex in Atlantis that was open and whirling and just waiting for somebody to come in. They came in, and given that they were adherents of the Lucifer Rebellion, they did not ask permission. They came in, and essentially they said, we're here, like it or not. If you don't like it, too bad, we don't really care. And immediately they tried to take over in Atlantis.
And what happened?
Well, evidently there were too few of them, and they were not able to do it. I don't fully understand that, because all they would have had to done is recreate the Merkaba experiment, and they could have controlled Atlantis. But evidently, for whatever reason, they didn't do that.
Maybe they lost the power when they came here.
It could be. I don't know. But what's so sad is that even though they didn't particularly like us, and for sure they didn't understand us, because we were of the intuitive feminine nature, the equivalent of about a 12 or 13-year-old girl. They were totally left-brain, logical, masculine, about the equivalent of a 65-year-old man. Those said they just came in and raped us. We're here, like it or not. But
did they stay?
they stayed, and they're still here.
Did they intermingle with us,
Yes, they
intermarry
did.
with us, so that we have
Yeah.
half-breed Martians?
Yeah, marriage is a pretty good term, because for about 50,000 years they decided that they would try and get along with us. They didn't particularly like us. They for sure didn't understand us, but they couldn't take over, so they decided to try and coexist. Talk about a 50,000-year marriage that really never worked. That's what we had in Atlantis.
But did we marry them?
We tried our best to get along with them as they did with us. But
did we marry them? I mean, are there people walking around today who are half Martians?
Good question. We all have, to some degree, Martian blood in us.
Very challenging thinking there. We're talking to Bob Frissell about this planet. Is it true? This book is true. He wrote it. The other book is, nothing in this book is true, but it's exactly how things are. Challenging thoughts right here on here. So a phone number if you'd like some information about the books, or a video he has also called Nothing to Something. The website is www.bobfrissell.com. It's B-O-B-F, like Frank, F-R-I-S-S-E-L-L, bobfrissell.com. And the number, an 800 number, if you'd like to order the books or find out some information about the books or the video, 1-800-662-1877. That's 1-800-662-1877. He also did work. I have more questions, too, but we're going to get some of the listeners in on it. So let's go to Atlantic City, New Jersey, on a cell phone. There's Tom. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Barbara. Hi, Bob.
Good morning, Tom.
Okay, like Barbara was saying about, let me get to it this way. We conquered the sound barrier. We've been to the moon. Isn't it just a natural progression that, we will conquer other things and eventually time and space travel? The only thing that's hindering us in space travel right now, the biggest thing is we're not built for space, but we're conquering that with genetic engineering. And if we could create human bodies for our minds in the future, in the distant future, because I'm not one of these people that believe that, the end is near. They've been saying that since Shakespeare and before him probably. Mm-hmm. But eventually we'll conquer all these things, and maybe we're the aliens. These aliens that we look at, this alien form, I read the book Roswell, and when they looked at the aliens under microscopes, their skin was woven, and it's like a built-in pressure suit kind of thing, and in thousands of years, or however long it takes us to do this, and conquer time, and come up with these spaceships that can come back into the past, into our past, into Jesus' past, that's what we'll look like. And our minds will be so advanced that they will communicate telepathically. And what would their mission be? I mean, why wouldn't it be to, I've got a curious mind. They always called me Doubting Thomas in Bible school, because I didn't believe anything. But it took me a long time before I actually sat down and read it for myself. Mm-hmm. And the thing that blew my mind the most, after I closed the book and I had read it, it took me, almost a year. I struggled through the Old Testament. The New Testament was a breeze. It's like storybook telling. Jesus is very charismatic. But, what they told, what the Hebrews were told in the past was like, wash your hands before you eat. Don't eat pigs. Because, they had trichinosis. That's what killed Mozart. But today we've conquered that. You can eat raw pork. People still believe that.
I don't think I would do that, actually.
Well, right, but I mean, don't eat rare pork. My wife won't eat it. Oh, it's not cooked right. But those little worms that were in that pork in Mozart today aren't in there now. We've conquered that with antibiotics and stuff like that. And people.
What's your question, Bob? What are you getting at?
I'm Tom, but my question is,
Excuse me, I'm sorry. You are Tom.
I guess it's a statement. It's like Bob, you know, he's getting real deep and he's pulling out these things that you have to be enlightened in some paranormal way to know what he's saying. But yet, when you ask him if he's one of these beings that has been around for thousands of years, he denies that. So I think Bob's a false prophet. I don't buy what Bob's saying, and I just believe that, I do believe in aliens, but I believe they're us in the future, and why not? I mean, that's just the way it is. We conquer everything.
Let's see what
everything
Bob,
that people...
Let's see what Bob says about, how do you react to that? He says you're a false prophet. How do you feel about that?
Well,
how would you answer him?
I don't particularly have a reaction to that, but Tom, there's a number of areas that you've gone into. If you believe, for example, some of the goings on in the Philadelphia experiment and in the Montauk Project, we already have conquered time. And what they were saying in the Montauk Project is that they developed the ability through their time tunnels to not only travel throughout time, but to travel throughout essentially to any point in the galaxy. So from that perspective, we've already done these things.
But we may already have done them in an experimental basis, but we haven't used that knowledge, have we? Or at least not that we know.
It depends on the level of technology you're looking at. Really what I see, Barbara, is a three-tiered technology. There's the technology that we have, there's the military technology, and then there's the technology of the global elite or the secret government that is probably at least a century ahead of anything that they've trotted out for public consumption. And so you have to look to that level to begin to understand what was going on in Montauk and UFOs, old hat, they've got them.
I'm curious, if the global elite, as you said, has all of these incredibly advanced technologies, whether they're weapons or whether they're just technologies that they can use for peaceful purposes, why don't they just take control of the Earth and the peoples of the Earth and do with us what they want, rather than letting us do what we're doing on a day-by-day basis, which in many cases is destroying not only us, but parts of the Earth?
Good question. Well, they do have control of the Earth. I think it's a question of if you're looking at overt control or covert control. Assuming, for example, in World War II, if the Nazis would have won, how long could they have maintained it? You know, at a certain point, human nature is just going to rise up and say no more. There is a huge problem with overt control. Covert control works a whole lot better.
But what are they controlling us for?
Well, basically, what it amounts to is domination, power, control. I don't know. You were asking, we were talking a little bit earlier about the Martians back in Atlantis and wondering if we've intermingled with them. Those of us on the planet who have a great degree of Martian blood in us are operating almost totally off of the left brain. And in fact, that seems to pretty well define the global elite.
Oh, now wait a second. There's a book out there saying men are from Mars.
Yeah.
Is that where
that from Venus?
Is that where that came from?
Well, that's really interesting.
Left brain men, right?
Yeah, left brain for sure.
There we go.
And it did come to us from Mars. Now, I don't know if he knew that literally or not, but that is absolutely what Thoth is saying.
Now, I'm still interested in going back to that you were either a Hebrew or us or a Martian. Where did the Hebrews come from?
Well, the Hebrews came allegedly from some point unknown, roughly in about the 28th century. And what I'd actually like to do, Barbara, is leave that. That's going to be a punchline, hopefully a little bit later in the program.
Well, we don't have too much time left, so give us the punchline now.
Well, okay. Evidently, the Hebrews in about the 28th century, we're talking about the child who failed the grade. That's essentially what Thoth said. That they had a very high level of awareness, and in spite of their level of awareness, they misunderstood something to the point to where they created a reality that was just awful. So that's what's meant by them having to come back and repeat the grade. That's why they came back and stepped into Atlantis 65,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's what you said before. I understand that. But what about the biblical Hebrews?
Well, before they came, they wrote down the Akashic records in great detail and put it in the first 5 books of the Bible, known as the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
So the Akashic records are basically everything. Any leaf that's ever fallen, every time a dog wags its tail, and anything that you and I have ever said, including the exact words of this discussion, etc., are recorded in detail in the Akashic records. So evidently they were able to do this, and they brought it back with them and stepped into our culture in Atlantis and along with us. Now, this is getting into the area of the Bible code.
Yeah.
There are certain areas that had to be changed in order to prevent the Hebrews from recreating their unspeakably awful reality. And if you know anything about the Bible code, for example, what it's saying is evidently is giving us a window into the future. For example, the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin in Israel was foretold in the Bible code, and it happened, just like the Bible code said.
Right.
Everything the Bible code said up to a certain point has happened. The first time it didn't, there was to be an explosion, a nuclear weapon detonated in Jerusalem. Obviously, that would have led to World War III, but it didn't happen. And so this is the first in a series of changes that have to be made if the Hebrews are able to prevent them from recreating this unspeakably awful reality. There's more.
But do we know what this unspeakable reality would be?
Well, imagine if the nuclear weapon would have gone off over Jerusalem.
Well, it still could, couldn't it?
Well, it's possible.
I mean, things over there are certainly extraordinarily tense, to say the least.
Yes, they are. But obviously that would have upped the ante to a significant degree.
No question about that. Let's get another call in from our West of the Rockies line in Ventura, California. Lori's on the line. Good morning, Lori.
Hi.
Hi.
Lori.
Bob, I'm also having trouble with what you're saying. I have studied the Ascended Master teachings, but I'm not getting clear of where you're coming from. Barbara has asked you repeatedly how you know what you're saying, and I don't feel satisfied with this. There's a book called Thoth the Atlantean. Is that the source of this information, of Thoth's teachings?
No. By the way, he calls himself, he pronounces it Thoth. I can tell you exactly where it came from. We have to introduce another level of awareness known as Melchizedek. And it's through the interaction of the Melchizedek level and Thoth, the specific Ascended Master, that this information came down. Usually there is one Melchizedek to oversee us on Earth. They're beings of tremendous light. What they are, in very simple terms, is what you might call the masters of the octave, in that they have the ability to not only travel interdimensionally, but they can go anywhere in the octave, and that means anywhere in the 144 different dimensional worlds, and they can remain conscious and they can remain stable. Well,
but how did you access these teachings?
Okay, I'll come to that. Usually there's one Melchizedek overseeing us, known as Machiavinda Melchizedek. In 1972, there was an event happening on planet Earth that ultimately has changed everything. In preparation for this, it was actually the dark forces that saw this first. They, by the way, have one being of heavy-duty darkness, to what you might call balance the Melchizedek. Usually there's one of each. Well, the dark forces brought four heavy-duty beings from the belt of Orion in response to this event in 1972. Well, answering that, the Melchizedeks brought 4 additional Melchizedeks. One of these individuals walked in, you might say, to a body on April 10th of 1972. He's a person we know today by the name of Drunvalo Melchizedek. He came from the Melchizedek level of awareness. And so when he came in 1972, one of the first things that happened is that he began having a regular communication with this Ascended Master by the name of Thoth. And it's through the interchange of information from Thoth to Drunvalo that this history of the Earth has been given. Now, I've not put it out as though this absolutely is fact. Thoth, in fact, himself has made it clear that it's not an all-seeing view. It's just through the eyes of one individual and what he saw in the course of 52,000 years.
Okay, so I'm familiar with the name Drunvalo Melchizedek. He works with Gray Brayton, I believe.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's get another call in here. Bob on a cell phone is on the line from some mysterious place. Bob is not there. Oh, you didn't hang on. All right, well, let's go to Siler on the East of the Rockies line and talk. He's from Huntsville, Alabama. Hello, Siler. Sire, excuse me. I'll get my ears screwed on right here.
It's quite all right. I want to say that he is directly on it. I was a member of the NOI, and we were discussing about the time frame of when we were evolved.
Mm-hmm.
We were 3 feet tall at one time, and that we didn't die, but we reproduced ourselves through our minds, and we brought into existence ourselves. And also, when he talked, I just heard him talking about Melchizedek.
Yeah.
Or Melchizedek. He's one of the 24 elders they speak of in the Bible.
Would you agree with that, Bob?
I'm not a student of the Bible. I really can't say about that.
Yes.
Okay.
But he's directly on it when he tells about us being the length, the height of us being 3 feet high.
Mm-hmm.
And also that there is life form on Mars as well as Mercury.
Actually, let me ask you about that, Bob. You mentioned life on Mars. What about life on other planets in our solar system?
Yes, there is life on other planets in our solar system, but not necessarily on the third dimension. Venus, for example, is nothing on the third dimension, but if you look to the higher overtones of the fourth dimension, you have the Hathor race, which are Christ consciousness beings. They're the 10 to 16 foot tall height range, the third level of consciousness, in other words, and it's what you might call the headquarters for our solar system. You come into our solar system, you have to check in through the Hathors at Venus.
Is there life throughout the universe?
Yes, there is. The universe is vast. In our octave alone, again, there's 143 different worlds, all occupying this space, separated by wavelength and by 90 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And so most of the dimensional realities do contain life. I mean, the universe is vast, and it's just filled with life. It's unimaginable.
Amazing. Let's go to Richie calling us from Nashville, Tennessee. Richie, good morning. Hi there, Richie.
Hey.
Hey.
What's
Good morning,
happening?
Richie.
Evening. And I was wondering how, you said you weren't a student of the Bible, but you're quoting all this stuff, about the Hebrew Torah. How does the New Testament play in to, all your theories?
That's
Well,
a good question, Richie. What about that, Bob?
again, I'm not a student of the Bible. I can talk a little bit about the first 5 books of the Bible. Again, that's the Torah, where evidently the Hebrews are in. If you know how to uncode it, and basically we've just gotten pretty much to the index so far.
Mm-hmm.
But encoded in the first 5 books of the Bible basically is everything from 65,000 years ago in Atlantis up until the 28th century. That's how they're able to foretell the future.
And you believe the future they're foretelling?
Well, it's been right every time up until the detonation of the atomic bomb that did not go off in Jerusalem.
Thank goodness for that. We're going to take a few more calls. And you had written that we need to, in fact, take control, and that we can do that by controlling the present and the future. How do we do that?
Well, I guess the basic premise basic point is that everything is a function of consciousness, that again we're creating the reality unerringly, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. Now, if we don't know it, Barbara, what we're going to do is to continue to create the present and the future out of our, what you might call, incomplete patterns from the past. If we do know it, we have an opportunity to create it in a way that's perhaps more to our liking. Now, what I mean by incompletions from the past is that we all have incompletions from the past that I say live in the body in the form of stuck energy. incompletions from the past for the very simple reason. I mean, major events like past lifetimes and birth and interaction with parents and other authority figures as small children being prime examples, because there was just too much going on in the setting of fear and ignorance for us to simply be with the situation. And so it's remained in the body in the form of stuck energy ever since. We're going to continue to interact with those incompletions, and they're going to continue to manifest and repeat themselves over and over until we become aware enough to complete them. And so the example that I give, again, is the example of birth, that if the woman is in fear in the delivery room, then the birth is going to be a reflection of that fear. It's going to be difficult, it's going to be painful. But again, it's documented, it's shown, it's on film, that it's possible to not only not be in pain giving birth, but it's possible to have an orgasm. Another example of what I mean is that if you have a roller coaster and you've got two people, one person who's saying that there is no way you're going to get me on that thing, and there's another person saying, I can't wait to get on that ride, it's going to be the most exciting, the most exhilarating experience I've ever had in my life. What's the difference? Difference is that the first person is consumed by fear, and the second person has moved through the fear through integration. And when fear integrates, what you have is excitement and exhilaration. So you're able to be with the experience, whatever it might be, in a totally different way. If we buy into the changes that are going on and that will continue to go on through fear and limitation, then it can be a very rough ride indeed. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, if we open up to our greater possibility, to our greater selves, you and I individually and collectively are far more than we've ever considered ourselves to be, for example, for the most part. We're intimately connected to the whole. We don't experience that. We see ourselves as separate from and cut off from the rest of the reality, but it's simply, it's an illusion. It's just not true. And as we continue to wake up and grow up and step into the larger picture, then we, in fact, are stepping into our power.
And we have control over that.
Yeah, well, we do. Yes, we do.
And it's the consciousness has to make it happen first, and that's what we're not doing.
Yeah, the Ascended Masters are very clear that how these things play out, it's totally up to us.
Wow.
Point.
It's a big responsibility.
Yeah, nobody said it was going to be easy.
Let's go to Petaluma, California, and say good morning to Bill. Good morning, Bill.
Yeah, hi, Barbara.
Hi there.
Good morning, Bill.
Hi, folks. First of all, I just want to say, Barbara, you do an excellent job.
Thank you.
And my mother, she just loves you, and she's very ill with cancer right now. I wondered if you could say a hello to Dolores.
Absolutely, Dolores. Hello, and take care of yourself.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Bob?
Yes?
Okay, hi. I'm thinking that there's got to be a standardization for knowledge, and I believe like the empirical verification for belief systems. And a skeptic like me who really wishes to believe, I would love to really tap into what you're saying and go for what you're saying, because it sounds very positive, and I think that you have a lot to say that's really worth saying. And I just wonder, how does somebody who sees a boat and he doesn't see the bottom of the boat in the boat get in that boat?
I love that.
and I mean it sincerely too, Bob.
Yeah.
I'm curious. How does one make that leap of faith? I don't know what your empirical premises are for the belief systems that you're espousing.
Yeah. Well, sure.
I mean, we're talking about metaphysical concepts, and they're abstract, and they're good and positive and life-giving. But what do we hold on to that's solid within the faith that we're talking about that'll carry us forward to say, okay, I feel secure in this knowledge?
There is an enormous degree of trust involved in the process of letting go.
Yeah.
Essentially, what I'm talking to and pointing to is the process of transformation. And on this side of the transformation, before it's happened or as it's still in process, it's at the very least very difficult to see what it's going to be like, and usually it's not possible.
Sure.
Very much in the way that if you had a group of caterpillars sitting discussing the possibility of flight, obviously some caterpillar is going to point out that it's not possible for caterpillars to fly.
That's right.
But on the other side of the transformation, the butterfly is too busy doing it to ask the question. And so when I say there's an enormous degree of trust, an enormous degree of faith involved in the process of letting go, I mean that is literally so, because we can't see what it's going to look like on the other side. When we move into the third level of consciousness, where our thoughts and our feelings and our actions are almost infinitely more powerful than they are right now, how can we possibly know what that's going to be like?
That's interesting. That's interesting you should say that, because there's an analogy that I heard of a snail, and the snail may only know its own individual blades of grass within it. It moves and has its being, so to speak, and so it only knows what's before it, and that's a perceptual problem, and that's its reality. And one day somebody sees a snail crawling across the street, and the person takes compassion on it, picks it up, and suddenly it's flying. And then it's dropped back into the grass, and it tells all of its other snail friends that, I was up here and I saw this wider domain of reality, and there's these things called these trees and houses, and the other snails are saying, he needs to take a trip to a Sigmund snail, or, that kind of thing. And this is the conundrum that we're stuck with.
Yeah, it's good. For 13,000 years, Bill, we've literally been cut off from the higher aspect of ourselves. When we fell from the higher overtones of the fourth dimension down here to the third dimension, along with that, we stopped breathing in a certain way. And the way we no longer breathe means that prana, which is life force energy, is no longer going through the pineal gland. What's the significance? Well, the pineal gland is actually the third eye, and when it's turned on, it's what you might call our eyeball of awareness to our higher dimensional and interdimensional aspects. You and I are far more and far greater than what we've accepted and bought into on this level. We're living in about the most limiting way that's possible, unwittingly at the effect of our fears and limitations, for the most part in ways that we not only don't know, but don't know that we don't know.
And why? Why are we so limited and stuck within the prison house of these bodies that we are only perceiving so much?
Because we're cut off from the higher aspect of ourselves. When the pineal gland is no longer functioning, the direct experience is separation and cut off from the rest of the reality. But the larger truth is that you and I literally do exist multidimensionally. And so when I'm talking about you and I mean it's literally true that it's really us on other dimensional levels, and there's just so much more to us and so much more to life than appears on this level.
Yeah, the difference between seeing with the eye and looking through a telescope, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, did he put a bottom in that boat for you?
Well, he's definitely given me a lot of reason to think and maybe put one foot in that boat.
There you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go for it, Bill.
I love that question about the bottom of the boat. That's a great. I'm going to remember that. We've got Patrick on the line on our East of the Rockies line from Columbia, Tennessee. Is it Columbia, Tennessee? Patrick? Hello, Patrick. Oh, he hung up. Well, give us a call back. We'll go to Key in Seattle. Good morning, Key.
Hi, Bob. Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
Good morning, Key.
Hi. I have a statement and then a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Cherokee tradition, and according to our tradition, we have roots in the Pleiades constellation. And according, I guess, to the Dogon, that they have roots from the Sirius constellation. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is the 60 million years ago timeline.
Yeah.
I had a past life reading once, and it was really interesting. I've been looking for some information about that timeline because of this past life reading. In the past life reading, the guy put me into like this, I guess, out-of-body experience where I went back to the life and explained it to him.
Mm-hmm.
And then I only got to a certain part in the life, like 30 years old, I think, from 11 to 30 years old. And in that particular reading, I told him it was 60 million years ago. And, of course, when I read it, I said, this has got to be just, a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't have said that. But then about 10 or 12 years later, a young woman approached me and told me her guides wanted to give me a reading, wanted her to do it. So we went and did it, and she did it differently. She sat across from me and put a crystal between us, and she talked. And it was like just amazing because she left off, or she started where I had left off.
Wow.
In that past life reading. So then that 60 million years became an issue in my mind, and I've looked for information on that timeline, and I hadn't really heard about anything until tonight when Bob mentioned how many million years that there's been life going. And I also wanted to say that it's very wonderful that you're speaking about these things. I come from a family where my mother always told me that there were many dimensions, and she would say, well, if you hear anything or you notice anything, don't be frightened. It's just people in another dimension living. And I grew up a really strange kid because of that. But, you know, it's funny because I have always been aware of these things, and to hear about them is really fascinating. One day, I actually felt, by turning from one direction to another one, I felt that I forget what Bob called it when I first started listening. When you switch from dimension to dimension, there's that moment right there in time where it's like the door, but it's like an invisible door.
Yeah.
I just felt like that one
night.
Huh? I felt that one time, and it was amazing. And I was very thankful that my mom had told me that, because that would have felt really strange.
Well, she gave you some preparation.
Yeah, she prepared me. But I was wondering about that 60 million years ago. Like, if
you have a question for our guest?
Yeah, it's that touch on that. If you would touch on that 60 million years ago just for a moment, so I could just gear myself into.
Okay, Bob, how about the 60 million years? How does that fit into the overall picture? I know you referenced it before.
Yeah, I don't know about 60 million years. All I can do is repeat what I said previously, that the Earth has a 500 million year history as a starseed where races have come from who knows where, started new races, and left, usually without a trace. The problem with 60 million years is that, again, something happened 5.5 million years ago that caused a break in the Akashic records. So we only have access to the past 5.5 million years. And I wish I knew about 60 million years ago, but I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, let's get another caller. And we have Brooke on the line is calling us. Brooke, are you there?
Yes, Barbara.
Where are you calling from?
Well, I'm calling from the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont.
Aha.
Probably the only kingdom in America other than arts.
Well, I like Vermont. I'm not sure if I was in your part of the kingdom, but that's okay.
Well, I'm always very amused that they call this a kingdom.
in more ways than one.
Yes, it is. And actually, I lived in California up until last fall. I lived in California for 10 years, and I came to Vermont last fall. And I hate to detract from your current guest because he has a very fascinating story, or very fascinating subject matter. But I tried to get through to you last week when you had a guest on who was speaking about infrasound and electromagnetic waves and how it affects the animals and the ocean.
It was Nick Begich, yeah, and we'll probably do a whole program on that soon. I hope to do that.
Well, I have a idea for a program for you, and Art's discussed this.
You know what I would like you to do, if you'd send me an email about it and give me whatever information you can, and then I will discuss it with the producers, because I think that I always like to get suggestions from the listeners, and I have many, and we try to follow up on as many as possible. You can send me an email to bsimpson, KSFO, @yahoo.com. Okay, let's go to Christy in Wisconsin. Hi, Christy. Thank you for calling Coast to Coast. I'm Barbara.
Hi.
Hi.
Is Bob there?
Hi, Christy.
He sure is.
I was just wondering why you think that we have, alien stuff in us, alien, I don't know what you had said before, but...
He said we're all part Martian.
Part Martian, yeah.
There you go. Why is that, Bob? She would like you to explain how that could be.
How could that be?
Yeah.
Again, there's much more going on than meets the eye, or according to accepted and conventional wisdom. One of the callers, for example, mentioned a connection with the Syrians. That's literally true according to Thoth and the Ascended Masters, that in fact, what you might call our parental aspect, the father aspect came from Sirius, and the mother aspect came from another planet in our solar system that, for the most part, we're not aware of. Zachariah Sitchin, however, is aware of it. It's the one that he calls the 12th planet, the planet known as Nibiru. So in order to begin to lift the veil and get an understanding of the bigger picture, the first thing that pops out at you is the ET equation, force